So why would you want to treat the earth like a body is one way of testing it. I think that's what all the high stakeholders want, is like this medical system that makes everyone sterile, because there's no two ways about getting sick other than having a giant medical infrastructure manhandle the issue. Plan B is to show the detriments on the Earth's surface, and one way of showing how sick that inferno is directly relating it to the space garbage all around it. So it's not a defining characteristic of it. You can focus more on how much of it is radioactive versus the ground game of it, how much weight behind it is crud. Space junk, all in one, is just one giant tumor. One way to be easy to manipulate what outer space could be if it was a single body is that having all of its stuff it's detoxing from be spewed out and handled with the same way that we sweat out dirty toxins. And this could be done overnight, like when someone has like night sweats, it could be done with space trash. How much of the radiation that is detriment could be thrown out within like satellites just ranging a cable spectrum. My view on good manners is not judging a book by its cover, but if you're trying to find that the grass is greener on the other side, aren't you a hypocrite? Call a spade for what it is, then there'll be no question the difference between harmonics and symmetry. When the startup band shows up and they're making a whole bunch of warming up noises, what kind of a note do you think they would strike a nerve in someone who just showed up for the warm-up band? And though they're playing low ball for high stakes and getting a rush off it, you gotta call a spade for that. I've been eavesdropping lately because I don't have any friends, and so when it comes apparent, you just have these conversations that you know are important. And this one girl said that she's so mad that the economy is bad, and then the older man was like, it's just because the countries, they don't know why we won't work together. I think they're afraid of each other more so than ever. For safety and security purposes, because I want to be safe and effective for the rest of my life, don't I? And for the protection of others, I have been eavesdropping more than lately on occasion. Just because people are breaking 6 feet around me all the time. I don't understand. What if they think that this is like a game? And so when shape comes in terms of two halves, even the DNA has two halves. But when it comes to in terms of a spiral versus the shape of a brain being android, but all around in what a unit circle is, a circle of canandroids. When it's split into the two hemispheres, those equal out all the odd indentations of what brains are, especially when they're sloshing about each time you move inside of its fluid. Those tiny like lobes have indentations that are not as perfect as your genes' spirals are. So those are what's played out and registering in constant orbits. And last night I saw this guy in like Michigan or Iowa somewhere where no one cares, and then he was part of like this group of people who wore hair in front of their faces with makeup, and then they went around drinking each other's blood in graveyards, and that's what tuned someone to think it would be okay to steal a car, and so they offed them. And so in between the time where they started growing out their hair and putting on makeup, and just before they would start going to the cemetery and entering it with a cup to pour the other person's blood into before drinking it, what were they doing during that day? Were they going into corners of stores talking about diagonals being red? But what about like the verticality of it? That's from the normal force. So the two together are what registers anything that is trying to be in totality. The same can be said for proteins when it doesn't have enough time to allocate the symmetry of ions or things that are cations or different shapes that have time or are lacking it in order to fully emulate the function of their diagonal. From a wave collapsing about it is always a diagonal that it's trying to read. So just imagine a whole bunch of light, and I was the light. It was propagating as I was spinning off of me, so I was reflecting the sun off of like my jacket that was reflective, versus if I was spinning faster and you looked at the more coarse material, it would be reflected like my jacket. And that's the interlude of quantum mechanics with photons. So a jersey.
Yeah, then we all had bubbles. We started slapping each other across the faces.
The difference of a waffle cone fabric and a straight cotton fabric is that of which perspiration will get captured in a flat fabric more than a waffle. Of this in electronics pigeonhole theorem, where in an electric grid is cavities, and that's how it gets excited when energy is ran through them. Cast mold achieves a dynamic of a calculator through its waffle cone structure. Jerseys are expensive because their material has to emulate a waffle as opposed to a straight. This level of complexion, though it might not seem all that much, is vastly different in consumer pricing, where it's doubled the amount. Why, oh why would that be? Well, because it emulates a closed loop system, one of which acts upon when you are sweating, all the perspiration acts as electric. If you're not utilizing electric right, it's because of a short circuit in a power grid. It is no surprise this is the shape that bees have chosen for their hive to emulate, as they stack each of the hexagon cavities in layers on top of each other. Is very much how a supercomputer stacks its motherboards on top of each other, because within the structure, or within the cast mold on top of the cast mold, is just like that song from YC Rax, stacks on stacks on stacks. And that's how a supercomputer is able to achieve a hive mind. How much of your body, if it were boiled down into a shape of a jersey, would read as the stack on a stack on a stack? In school, in 3rd grade, we made these things called flat Stanleys. We'll wait for this name. With flat Stanleys was sent a piece of paper of a flat, cut out, kind of gingerbread looking figurine, and sent it in mail through different states. All together, we're assimilating across the country these flat pieces of paper that were shaped as a small gingerbread man. In realistic terms, it was the shape of, or the size of a fetus. If you want to get literal, that's what was flat, and it was shipped out and about around the mailing system. Hundreds of these, and if they were all stacked on top of each other, not even physically, but just like throughout the flatness of the curvature of land, then all that could be cat-sized within a hive to be flat, as opposed to the flat Stanley being flat. It would take within all the differentiation of land markings that which it were passing. You know, like from a doorway entrance of two over accentuations, anything can be thought up as an entrance and an outlet between the passage, which would allow a flat thing to achieve the gradients of the land. And when you're looking at time as a variable, you could output how much curvature the Stanleys as a collective would occur, and shaping that as a hexagon like bees would, or whatever shape supercomputers, if you combined all of them together, they would emulate one basic shape. That shape for all the flat Stanleys, you would have had yourself a grassroots supercomputer within the United States as a procedure of just some third grade artwork.